It's time to once again talk about the top books on the CGC census. This time we're looking at the year 1939. Some really important books came out that year that were in the burgeoning days of superheroes and golden age comic books, but I think you'll be a little bit surprised at what hits the top of the list. Let's take a look at the top of the list and other huge keys up next on this video from Bronzeville Comics. Hello, panelologists. This is Jim from Bronzeville Comics. Welcome back to another video. Before we start, please like, comment, and subscribe. Check out the description of this video for links to my eBay store, my email, my whatnot, and my Instagram. So I've been doing this series for a few weeks now, and I've been going up year by year looking at the top books on the CGC census based on CGC blue labels. And that is an important distinction at this period in time because a lot of the bigger key books have restored titles as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to count down the top 10, and I think I'm not sure you'd be able to guess what's number one. And it's number one by a fairly wide margin. And then we're going to take a look at the books that didn't crack the top 10. The top 10 all have one thing in common. We'll talk about that when we go through the whole list. Coming in at number 10 here is Detective Comics number 34. This is the book that has the 10th most blue label copies on the CGC census of books cover dated 1939. And it's the last non-Batman cover. You see Crimson Avenger on the cover. And the cover by Craig Flessel. There are 57 copies of this on the census, and that's going to be a number that I'm going to refer back to when we look at the books that didn't make the top 10 and how many of those are on the census. Let's look at number 9. Number 9 here is Action Comics number 15. This is the 5th Superman cover. And remember at the time, Fred Gardner did the cover with Superman. It wasn't Siegel that wasn't Schuster that did it. He did the interior art. But this really cool submarine cover. This is just the 5th time that Superman appears on the cover because he kind of rotated throughout the early months of Action Comics. And the Superman books, as we'll see, are a little more sought after than the ones that don't see Superman. I think they were probably also saved more. Because the thing to remember is by this point in time, a year after his debut, Superman was already a big character. And as those books aged and they were sitting around and we were going to throw them out or not, we're going to send them to the paper drive during World War II. Well, it's Superman. Maybe we'll hold on to Superman. You know, maybe the kids will like that or whatever. Maybe my younger brother will read it. Okay, let's look at number 8 on the list. And number 8 is Action Comics number 18. By the way, there are 59 copies of 15 on the census, 62 copies of this on the census. And it's a non-Superman cover, just a standard kind of Air Fighters cover. And this was what happened at the time. This is the last one that doesn't feature Superman. It has the 3 aces, who I believe are the characters we see on the front page, the cover here. Let's go to number 7 on the list, and this is a huge book. This is one of the classics, an incredibly expensive book, Detective Comics number 31. This classic Bob Kane cover. Did Bob Kane really draw it? I'm not sure. But this is that classic cover that Neil Adams homaged in the Bronze Age. Just a very sought after book. So over the last several decades, this has been kind of the book that collectors have looked for, kept in collections, and submitted for grading. And 63 copies have gotten the blue label of this. One thing I'll note about this, there was a DC 100-page Super Spectacular that reprinted the story in here, and it's a great story. It is a lot of fun with the monk, who's kind of almost like a Dracula-esque Eastern European character, Julie Madison, who was Bruce Wayne's girlfriend at the time. Though she was kind of ditched a little bit later. I guess maybe when Robin came along. So there are 63 copies of this on the census. At number 6 on the list is Detective Comics number 33, which has 66 copies on the census. Another classic Bob Kane cover. There are a lot of questions as to how much Kane contributed in these early days. Of Batman jumping off this bridge, and he has the gun holster, chasing the speeding car, going through the underpass. He's jumping off the overpass. So really kind of fun. And how the top of the overpass meshes in with the Detective Comics trade dress. There are, again, 66 copies of this on the census, and it does tell the origin of Batman. Now, here's at number 5 on the list. And I find this very interesting because this is an enormous book. And which one? There are a few enormous books from 1939. Which one is number 5 on our list for number of copies on the census? It's Superman number 1. This particular one is the summer edition. There are 76 copies of this on the census in a blue label. Right? This is the first ongoing Superman title, and really the first superhero to have their own title ongoing. 76 blue label copies on the census, but there are 104 restored copies. Now, why is that? And if you have theories, you can put them in the comments below. My theory is that it was a very sought-after book. As soon as collectors started collecting and selling books, as soon as adults started in on that, this was a sought-after book. So probably in the 60s, 70s, 80s, there were folks that tried to make the book look more appealing and ended up doing amateur restoration. The other thing, too, is, this is a book from 1939, right? It's 85 years old, and a lot of copies have started to, show their wear, become very acidic, started to fall apart. So, I would think that people are trying to restore that and maybe get the acidity out of the book and clean the cover, that sort of thing. But this is, again, a huge key. 76 blue labels, plus another 104 restored. At number 4, actually tied for 3rd on the list, one of them is Action Comics number 19. This is where Superman begins his consecutive appearances on the cover. There are 85 copies of this, blue labels, on the census, and that is tied with Action Comics number 17, where, again, we see kind of the same thing. Superman fighting a tank here. There are 85 copies of this on the census. And Superman, this was 17, he was on the cover. 18, he wasn't. And 19, he was on the cover for good. Let's look at number 2 on the list. And number 2 on the list is an interesting one. It's New York World's Fair Comics, number 1939. It's the first published appearance of Sandman, Wesley Dodds. And if you look along the right-hand side here, there's kind of fun stuff. This is 96 pages, plus the cover. It's really 100 pages for 25 cents. And that's kind of an upcharge. Comic books at the time were 68 pages for 10 cents. You're not even getting 50% more, and you're paying an extra 150%. But you get this cross-section. And DC did this because they were able to pull all these characters from a couple different titles, from Adventure Comics and what have you. The above favorites and many others. You have Superman, although he's depicted on the cover here oddly with blonde hair. Zatara, who premiered along with Superman in Action Comics number 1. And then you also see Butch the Pup, the Sandman in his first appearance, and Ginger Snap. So, a weird mixture again at the time. And DC was known for these kind of compilations and anniversary issues and such, kind of, I think, to promote the different titles in their lineup. But what's number 1 on the list? What do you think number 1 is? We've already seen Superman number 1. So what got to number 1 on the list? The most blue label copies on the census for 1939. And it is Superman number 2. There are a total of 161 blue labels on the census, which really outpaces second place. New York World's Fair had 87 copies on the census. This is almost twice as many. Plus, there are another 79 restored. Now, Superman 1 had a couple of different printings, and I guess by this time, DC decided, boy, this character's popular. let's send out a lot of issue number 2s. I don't know if there were more printed at the time, but there were more that have been saved over the years. Just, a really cool Joe Shuster cover. So, again, Superman number 2, the most submitted book on the CGC census for 1939. Now, that's the top 10. What books didn't make the list? I'm sure you have one or two in mind. Let's go to 25th place on the census. And one of those books that's tied for 25th is Detective Comics number 27, the first appearance of Batman. There are 37 copies on the census and another 40 restored. You add those two together, that's just one more than the Blue Label copies for Superman 1. So this has quite a few less copies than the book that made our list. To make 10th place, you needed 57 copies. But what's also interesting, within just 4 months after this, Detective Comics 31, that classic cover, you're up to 63 copies on the census. So you've improved by 26 copies. I don't know why this is more scarce. I mean, it wasn't a number 1, so maybe that didn't clue people in. It was a title that had been ongoing, so people really didn't anticipate Batman coming up. You didn't have a previews of what was going to be coming up other than ads in other books. So this was 37 copies on the census, another 40 restored. What's it tied with? Marvel Comics number 1, the first appearance of the Human Torch, Kazar, etc., the origin of the Submariner, and the first timely comic. Now, all the books in the top 10 were DC books. DC was dominating comic books at this point in time. And compared to the other publishers at the time, they had more synergy. They were actually a combination of National and All American that pooled their resources together to advertise together, and I'm sure had similar distribution. So this book, this classic Human Torch cover, which doesn't look anything like the Human Torch, has a very pulpy feel to it, I believe. Again, there are 37 copies of this on the census, Blue Label, the exact same as Detective 27, and another 33 restored, which is 7 fewer restored copies. So it's about the same level of rarity as Detective Comics 27, or even say scarcity, considering the number of people that want this book. There are going to be books out there in collections that have not been graded, but probably as time goes by, fewer and fewer, like the complete DC collection that's just started to come to market. Most of those books weren't graded by her. They were graded by Heritage after the fact. Okay, let's go to number 27 on the list, and this is Action Comics 13, Superman cover, a cool one with kind of that very Art Deco train on it. Very common for Superman books at the time. 36 copies of this on the census. And it's the first appearance of the Ultra Humanite, who was kind of the pre-Lex Luthor villain, the bald scientist, and then later was transformed into putting his brain into the body of a white gorilla. That would be in the 1980s that was done. Anyway, let's continue to go. Let's go to 44th on the list. And this is Smash Comics number 1 from Quality. It's the first robot on the cover of a comic book. The Hugh Hazard is Iron Man, and he's fighting a gorilla. I kind of highlighted this book when I did my Quality Comics rundown. Quality Comics was one of the early comics. They produced quite a bit of good heroes, as we'll see as we move on. And there is another major first appearance of really their first huge hero. I probably shouldn't have used that terminology. First popular superhero that was one of the mainstays of the golden age of comics. At number 51 is a key. 51st, there are 27 copies of this on the census. Mystery Men Comics number 1, the first appearance of the Blue Beetle, and also the Green Mask and Rex Dexter of Mars. It is a Fox Features Syndicate book. Those books are hard to come by, and having only 27 Blue Labels on the census points that out. Blue Beetle has had different incarnations throughout the years, and obviously culminating in his own movie, since DC eventually acquired the rights to this character. He's been within the the comic book sphere for quite a bit. Let's go to 69th on the list with just 22 blue labels on the census. Adventure Comics number 40, the first conceived story of Sandman. This came out after that New York World's Fair comics, but this was really supposed to be Sandman's first appearance, and it's his first kind of full cover appearance. Art by Craig Flessel on the cover. So I think he really knocked it out of the park with this. Just a classic Sandman cover. And let's go to number 82 on the list, and this was a new title by DC, All-American Comics number 1, which is going to have the first appearances of Hop Harrigan in Red, White, and Blue. Hop Harrigan was I believe, an air fighter that DC used, and Mutt and Jeff make another appearance here, and Scribbly as well. So very much an anthology title, more humor-oriented than action or adventure or detective. I'm talking about the genres, not the specific titles, but this eventually would house, much like other DC books of the Golden Age, house a number of superheroes every month. And that has actually the same 20 copies on the census, the exact same as Wonderworld Comics number 3, which is the first issue in the title. It was previously Wonder Comics, and it's the first appearance of the Flame, who was one of the mainstay heroes of the Fox Feature Syndicate lineup. And these early Fox books are very sought after by collectors and very hard to find. Both of these, All-American 1 and Wonderworld 3, both have 20 copies on the census. Now, I talked about a first appearance for Quality Comics, and it was a big one. Well, that's kind of true. It's Feature Comics number 27, which is the origin and first appearance of Dollman, one of the early superheroes that we see here, and really the first superhero from Quality Comics, and they would have many more. There are just 16 copies of this book on the census, a book which features the first appearance of Dollman. His own title, he got his own title. That would run into the early 1950s. He was one of the last holdouts of superheroes in the Golden Age. And then we'll go to 127th on the list with 15 copies, and it's Jumbo Comics number 9, which is the first cover appearance of Sheena. We see her in the background. This is by Fiction House, and these Jumbo and Jungle and some of the other titles, Rangers Comics by Fiction House, more so for their mid to late 40s stuff, is quite popular among collectors. It's one of those publishers that no longer exists, unlike Timely/Marvel or DC, but the characters have lived on. Sheena had originated in the pulps, actually. Another character originated in the pulp that had his first appearance was John Carter, Warlord of Mars, who made his first appearance in Funnies number 30, just 10 copies on the census. And then let's go to an extremely hard book to find. I don't know if you want to call it scarce or call it rare, but there aren't many of them. And it's Motion Picture Funnies Weekly number 1, which is the first printed appearance and origin of the Submariner. This predates Marvel Comics number 1. This was a giveaway at movie theaters. It's a little bit smaller than a standard comic book. And there are just five blue labels of this book on the CGC census. The number that exists can't be that much more than that. I mean, what, maybe a dozen? Let me know what you think in the comments below. So that's a wrap-up of 1939, and then we're going to go to one of the most important years in comic book history because of the explosion of superheroes, and see what's number 1 there. A little bit of a surprise here that Detective Comics 27 and Marvel Comics number 1 were so far down on the list, just not a lot of those have survived, and that Superman number 1 took the 5th position. I'd like to thank you all for stopping by. In the meantime, you can take a look at a couple of my other videos here, and this is Jim saying until next time, enjoy your comics.